Hey, it's Andrew here at BTO Range in Conroe, Texas. And today on the bench, we have a Marlin 336 rifle, and we're going to take it apart. We're going to kind of show you what some of the problem parts are on this rifle. There's really not a whole bunch that goes wrong on these guns. They're a relatively stable platform. They're really nice rifles. They've been in production basically the same way since 1948 with the round bolt. So the takedown procedure on this gun is similar to any of the other round bolt Marlins. But there are a couple of parts on here that we see more common than others that are messed up. So we'll talk about that as we go. So the first thing we're going to do, this particular gun's a 1968 gun. We did a history video on it not long ago. And so this doesn't have the crossbolt safety. The crossbolt safety occurred in the mid-80s. So this is prior to that. So let's continue on and take this apart. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clear it. So we're going to bring the lever back. Look in there, there's nothing in there. So now, since we have the lever back, we're going to go ahead and bring that lever to the halfway point. We're going to remove it so that we can take that bolt out. Now the screw slots on these Marlins are relatively thin, and of course I didn't bring the screw slots are relatively thin, so it's a good idea. I like to fit these screwdriver blades, and these are hologram screwdrivers, so these are not your typical Stanley screwdriver blades. So these fit all the way into the slot. You want to make sure that they fit the slot side to side and front to rear, so that there's less chance that you're going to tear out the screwdriver slot. Because sometimes, especially, and I doubt this gun's been apart since it was put together in the Marlin factory, so we may run into some tough screws. So once we pull, none of these bolts interchange, so we need to make an effort to keep them apart. So we just remove the bolt, the bolt's in there, but we remove the lever. We're going to set it aside. But one thing we're going to look at real quick is this plunger that's right here in this lever. There's a spring underneath that plunger, and it's held in place by a very small cross pin right there at the tip of that screwdriver blade. There's a cross pin. So there's a spring underneath that. And one of the problems that we run into, or one of the complaints that rifles get checked in for, is it's hard to operate the lever. This detents the lever. This detents the lever to where, let's see if I can get this back in where I show you. It detents the lever into the lock position is what I'm trying to say. So if there's crud or dried oil or something in here that prevents this plunger from moving freely, it can make the lever stiff to operate. So it's a simple fix. A lot of times you can take some real thin oil like CLP and just drop it in there and work this plunger a little bit and it'll free up. Worst case scenario, you take that, you drive that little 1/16 inch pin and pull the plunger and spring out. Now it is directional. There is a way it's supposed to go. It is beveled longer on the top than it is on the bottom. So when you put it back in, make sure that long bevel is at the top. Now that that's out, we can remove this bolt to the rear. And when we remove the bolt to the rear, we have freed up the ejector to just come out of the receiver. The bolt holds the ejector in, and this stud right there on the bottom of the ejector assembly will be visible when it's installed, will be visible in this hole. So it indexes in that hole and in a groove on the inside of the receiver, and it's held in place by the bolt. So this is the typical field strip for general cleaning of the Marlin 336, or really any of the round bolt Marlins. It can be the 444, the 1895, the 375 caliber gun, and the Marlin 336 ERs, and 308 Marlin Express and all that type of stuff. Clean basically the same way, but when you put it back together, you have to remember to slide this guy back in place, and you would slide it in from the front along that groove until it fits into that slot, and then you would run the bolt back in. And the extractor rides in this groove of the bolt here, or the ejector rather. The extractor is a saddle type extractor that's clipped under its own spring tension into the side of the bolt. So when this guy fails, you can't really straighten it, but it's just a simple matter to replace it. It just pops off and the new one pops on, and it sits in its groove there. So that's a pretty simple process. And it does happen. So this is available. I mean, all these parts generally are available because they've made a lot of these guns. And Ruger is producing the guns again with some parts changes of Ruger voltage fluted, things of that nature. But most of these parts are generally available. So the, let's see, 91871, 91871. So the bolt is electro-penciled to the receiver. So we have to, it's a split firing pin on this bolt, right? So this is the rear firing pin and then the front firing pin. If you notice, they are not in line. That's on purpose. So the only way the firing pin is in line for the hammer to strike it and the firing pin to come through the breech face is if the gun is fully into battery, because there's a block that we're about to take out that comes up and pushes this in place when the gun is fully in battery. So removing that is simple as just a pin to remove that, and then you can strip out the rest of the bolt. So the next step would be to take the stock off. There's no stock bolt through here. The stock is retained by that screw right there. So notice we can't pull the trigger because on the Marlins, this is a safety here in this lower tang. The safety physically blocks the trigger from going to the rear so it won't trip the sear and won't allow the hammer to fall. We can make it fall by pushing that up and doing that. You can certainly do that if you want. And you would need to get the hammer spring and stuff out. See, we have a little bit thicker. Yeah. To do this right, you're going to go through a lot of different screwdriver bits. Yeah, that's in there good and tight. If we'd gone in there with a poorly fitting screwdriver, we run the risk of popping or cratering out that let me do this so I don't have to fight balancing the gun. The last thing you want to do is risk screwing up a screwdriver slot or a screw slot, because that just externally, it looks horrible, and it sure does make it look like somebody that has no business getting in a gun has gotten in a gun. The screws are available. They're being remade. So now, there's too much stuff in the way. These can be on there pretty tight, especially if they haven't been removed in 55 years. So now that this stock is off, real quick, this is just screwed on. It's a composite or plastic grip cap with a white line spacer. You run into these with the white line spacers that are cracked out or chipped out. Those can be found. They're being remade. So that can be replaced. This little bullseye here is just a Marlin trademark. A lot of times you'll find these rifles and someone has inserted a sling swivel into the bullseye, which is not the right place for it to be. It needs to be about here. But in any event, these are being remade also, and they simply can be glued in. So now that we're back down to here, we can remove this hammer spring and the hammer spring retainer. So this is simply in a dovetail small slot in this lower tang, and that's holding the spring in place. So we're going to just displace it off to the side, bring that to the rear. We can remove the spring that way, and now we can remove the hammer. Hammer indexes off of this screw here, so we're going to change bits again. So we have to remove this in order to remove that lower tang as well. So now we can remove the two screws that hold the lower tang in place. That's this one and this one here. Those screws are the same diameter, but they are different lengths, and I'll show you why. So you see the long one goes, let's put these side by side so you can see them from that top view camera. They're different lengths. The long one goes on the underneath, the short one goes on the side, because the short one actually, and we can just kind of now remove this guy, and this is probably stuck in there really good. There we go. So that screw actually indexes through the receiver and screws into this hole here. So if we use the longer screw, it'd go in there, but it'd stick out to the inside of this and interfere with the movement of the internal parts. So when you put it back together, you have to make sure that the right screw goes in the right place. So this is the trigger is simply cross-pinned in place. It's got an over travel stop right here. There is not a separate sear on this gun. Well, I mean, sort of, yeah, there is a separate sear on the gun, but it indexes directly onto the trigger. But what I wanted to bring to your attention is this trigger stop. This has been done a few different ways on Marlin lever actions. This is a formed wire spring, obviously, that is pressing this in. So when the lever is closed, the lever pushes up against that stud right there, and that clears that stop out of the way to allow the trigger to come to the rear. Pushing the sear forward allows the hammer to fall forward. So there's no real need to take this apart unless you need to replace the spring, or if there's something here that needs to be replaced. It can be cleaned very easily with a brush with this assembled. So it is a very tight fit into the frame. Now notice that this is the serialized part. That's very definitely a removable part. Here comes the hammer. The hammer is now free to come out. So the serial number itself isn't visible on the receiver, the actual receiver of this gun. So it is possible to come up with a gun where this has been replaced, and replaced with either one with a different serial number or one that doesn't have a serial number at all, because the later guns have the serial number back here on the upper tang. ATF started requiring to put it here on the receiver itself, I believe beginning in '69. So be aware of that. So we still have the carrier in there. Carrier index is off that little screw right there. We can remove this. That's the block. There's only one way to put that guy back in. That's the block that comes up inside of the gun and pushes the firing pin. When it locks into place, it's what pushes this firing pin in line so that it can fire. It also serves as the locking mechanism for the gun itself, for the bolt during firing. So now that that screw is out, we can bring the carrier out. Now, there have been several different carriers over the years for the 336 series. A lot of it's caliber dependent. The 3030 carrier is different than the 44 mag carrier. There's a 219 zipper carrier, and it's a different carrier than, say, the 444 or the 1895. So the carrier also serves as the cartridge stop for the magazine. So that's what this flange here does on the bottom. So excessively worn carrier may cause, when the gun is in the upright, or the carrier is in the upright position here, we're blocking the cartridges from coming out of this magazine tube. So the last thing to take out would be the loading gate. The loading gate is its own spring, and it's that little smaller yet screw here. And this needs to be very, very snug. Snug, but not super tight. So even with just that loose, well, we're still okay there. But if this screw is allowed to back out to any degree, then we have a lot more movement in this loading gate, and that can actually fall into the receiver and block the carrier from lifting up and down. So when we get a Marlin 336 in with a carrier that can't operate the action because the lever won't move, a lot of times it's because this particular screw has come loose. There's no separate spring. The carrier is its own spring on the Marlin. So, oops, well, okay, I'll deal with that in a minute. So that's a stripped out receiver on the Marlin. To strip the rest of the gun out is pretty basic. If you want to remove the magazine spring and follower, you would pull this screw right here. This cap comes off and the spring comes out the front. Wouldn't it have been simple if they'd used the same screwdriver or the same screw slot specs all the way around the gun, but no. Now we can remove this screw and this screw to loosen these barrel bands, and then we can remove this tube out of the front. We could take a punch and get in there and work this plug out and take the spring and the magazine follower out. This gun is in our used fleet, and I don't want to take the risk of marring it up. Moving this band off would almost certainly cause this sticker to get rubbed off or messed up, so I'm not going to remove it on this particular rifle. But in order to take it apart any further, these screws come out, the tube comes out. That will allow this band to rotate 180 degrees and come across the front side. You have to remove the front side hood to do that. This rear band would come off, tube comes out, fore-end comes off, and then you're left with just the barrel and the receiver. So really there's not a whole lot of need to take it apart this far to this degree, unless you're just going to do a complete cleaning. We always suggest that gets done on working guns that are actively hunted and shot. We like to see those come in annually, especially if they've been out in inclement weather, to have that done. And we take them all apart. We look at all the mating surfaces. We make sure that everything's good to go on the particular rifle. So there's no big tricks into putting this gun back together. It goes back together exactly the way it came apart. The only two screws that can be put in the wrong spot are these two that we talked about. Just remember that the longer of the two screws goes in the hole on the bottom, And that's really all there is to it. There's not a whole lot of tips and tricks there. It's easy to get the screws messed up, but they won't really fit. I mean, the hammer screw and the lever screw are probably the closest similar screws, but you can see those are remarkably different. So obviously they're not going to sync up like they're supposed to. But when you take the gun apart, if you leave the screws kind of with their associated parts, then it's really hard to not get it back together correctly. So that's the Marlin 336. A little bit more than a typical field strip on this gun. And some of the stuff to watch out for. Really the only things that go wrong, this spring, this leaf spring can break. Just replace that entire piece. The plunger on this lever sometimes sticks, needs to get freed up. And then this screw gets loose and can lock up the action. Otherwise, gosh, it's unusual to really have to do much more than that to a 336 other than keep it clean and general maintenance, and they'll last a lifetime. So that's a 336 Marlin. Thanks for watching, guys. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. We try to push out some of this stuff every week. And we appreciate all your support. We'll see you on the next one.